What's happening, Booth Junkies? I'm just going to take a quick moment to talk to you about one of the things that I've used to really help me clean up my audio to make it much easier to get it ready for production, and that is using a noise gate. One of the nice things about a noise gate is it helps reduce the sound of the silent parts, so in between the words and the phrases. That's the time when you can normally hear ambient noise, you can hear your breath, you can hear yourself rustling around in the booth. So I've taken a few seconds, I've recorded a few seconds of audio, and I want to show you what it sounds like before the gate gets applied and after the gate gets applied, and you'll see how much cleaner the audio sounds. Now, you're probably going to need your headphones for this one. So grab them, put them in, and then it'll make it much clearer what we're talking about here. So let's take a look at the audio. What we have here is just a minute's worth of recorded audio, and we're going to see what it sounds like before we apply the gate, and then we'll configure our gate and apply it, and you'll hear the difference it makes. So let's just listen to it in its raw form right now. It was a hot summer's day, and I was the driver on Engine 3 on the east side of town. The backstep man was... Okay, so just in that first second, if you have your headphones on, you'll hear right away, right in the beginning, you'll hear a mouth click and some breathing. Hear that inhale? It was a hot summer's day, and I was the driver on Engine 3 on the east side of town. The backstep man was... And then there's an inhale, the next word. Now, inhales are fine, but they tend to get a little bit distracting, especially if you slash breath into it. I try and practice breathing as quietly as I can, but you can still hear them. In for the day. 2 privates and a lieutenant. Oh, and listen to that. If you have your headphones on, in for the day. You'll hear 2 privates and you'll hear a little thump in between there. I think it's probably my heater or furnace or something that made a noise, or maybe it was some traffic from the outside, but there's a little tiny thump in there. Not something that maybe everybody would notice, but your engineer or you certainly want to have the highest quality recording you can. So you want to make sure that little knock gets managed. Let's listen again. In for the day. 2 private. You hear that little thump in between? In for the day. 2 private. So the great thing about this is a noise gate will help us manage all that stuff. And here's all a noise gate is. A noise gate is just a door that closes during the silent part and opens when there's sound. So it lets sound through and tries to make the quiet parts quieter. So it closes down on it. It gates out the ambient sound. Reaper, which is my preferred DAW, has a gate built in. I think a lot of audio workstations probably have a gate built in, but I'm going to be showing you the one that comes with Reaper. It's called Regate, and I think a lot of the settings are going to be similar no matter what DAW you choose. So let's go ahead and add it in. The way we do it in Reaper is we click the FX button, and it brings up a list of plugins, different effects that you can add. The one that we have here is called Regate, and I've already got that pre-selected here, so I'm just going to add that. And by default, you'll see that it comes with this default configuration. If it's turned on, I think we're going to find that it's not going to do anything. It was a hot summer. You can still hear the mouth click. You can still hear the breath. And the reason is because we have to go through and do some configuration. Now, luckily for voice artists, there's not a ton of configuration that we need to do. There's really just a couple of settings. And they're going to vary depending on what your room sounds like. They're going to depend on how you deliver and where your settings are on your interface. But I'll show you what mine are, and hopefully it will help you get yours set. The very first thing that you need to set is the threshold, and that is how loud the sound has to be before the gate opens. By default, we can see here that Reaper's gate is set to -infinity. So that means pretty much any sound at all is going to keep the gate open, or so the gate is just open all the time. The door is open and all the sound's coming in. So the first thing we do is we adjust our threshold slider until the background noise is cut out, but the voice comes through. So let's just hit play. It was a hot summer's day, and I was the driver on Engine. And so we want to make sure that the threshold is set below that, but above where the background noise is. So let's just record. Let's just record for the sake of argument. Let's just record a few seconds of room tone, shall we? If we turn the FX off and listen back there, you should hear me breathing, fidgeting. Pretty quiet, but you can hear it in the beginning. You hear that noise? That's the background. That's the room tone. Let's see what the gate says that is for us. Turn our gate on for that section. You see where that gate lives right there, or where that threshold lives? So that is our basic room tone. So we want to get above that point, and that will automatically clamp down on everything. Now my booth's pretty quiet, so that's minus about 60 dB. That's pretty quiet. But we want it to be, we want to manage a little bit higher than that because we want to take away the breaths and any rustling and any thumps. So I normally bring it up a bit higher than that, so maybe minus 40 dB. And now we can hear that the gate is completely closed, right? That sound, that background noise, is not loud enough to get in. Perfect silence. We like that. Okay, so now if we take that and we apply it back to our recording, let's see what happens. It was a hot summer's day, and I was the driver on engine 3 on the east side of town. The backstep man was great. So now I don't hear that breath. So automatically I've taken out my background breath. I've taken away that rustling. Let's see if it also gets that little thump that's in there. In for the day. 2 privates and it did. In for the day. But there's something here that we should listen for. And listen for the very end of that word day. In for the day. You can hear the gate close, can't you? It clamps down on it, and it actually sounds like that word day gets cut off. In for the day. You hear that? In for the day. That's no good. People will notice that. People will hear that gate, and they'll say, oh, there's something going on there. So we can adjust some of the different settings to help try and get that trailing off word. To get the ends of words, there's a way for the gate to close more slowly, and that's called the release. So when the gate is open and we're going to close it, when the gate is, open and it closes back down, we might want to have it take just a little bit longer. We can adjust the release in milliseconds, or we can tell it to hold the gate open for a few milliseconds after the threshold has come down. So we'll try a couple of different settings and see which helps that day sound not get cut off. My gut tells me it's probably going to be the hold. We want to just hold the door open for a couple of milliseconds, handful of milliseconds before that gate starts to close. So we'll probably do it at like half as long as the typical release is by default. So let's set it at 50 milliseconds. That's really short, but that should be long enough, hopefully, to get that last word day so we can hear the rest of the word day. Placement from headquarters to fill in for the day. There we go. We can hear it now. Placement from headquarters to fill in for the day. You can hear that little tiny bit. And so we're just holding that gate open for just a microscopically extra time just to get that last little letter and breath to come out. And you can still hear that gate close a little bit, and we're going to address that in 1 second. Orders to fill in for the day. You can still hear it because I do a little bit of an inhale there. If the beginning of the words are cut off, I'm not sure if I have any examples. 2 privates and a lieutenant made up the crew of Engine 3. And when one of the privates was out sick, the other one would automatically become the driver for the day. The air was filled with the fragrance of summer that morning as we waited for our guest to arrive. It would be a beautiful day for... I don't hear anything there, but if you do find that the beginning of the words are getting cut off, the pre-open. So if you find the beginnings of your words are getting cut off, you can actually tell it to open the gate a little bit in advance. So that's what the pre-open is. So I usually do the pre-open like 5 or 6 milliseconds, just so that gate can start to open before the sound comes in. And that way you don't hear some of those really sharp sounds like P's and B's that have a really sharp beginning that the attack doesn't take too long to open. So I just say open it up a few milliseconds in advance. So the pre-open and the attack I usually do it a few milliseconds in advance. Now, if we go back to that day, out of town, the back's still in for the day. So there's still a little tiny bit of noise gate that you hear. You can hear because my breath is, I'm actually taking a little bit of breath. The other setting that you'd want to mess with on a gate is the wet and the dry setting, and it's really the dry setting. If you've never heard those terms before, there's what you call the wet and the dry side. The dry side is your original recording as it's stored on disk, exactly as it went through the microphone on disk with no effects applied. The wet side is after the audio has gone through whatever effect it is, in this case the gate. It's after it's gone through that effect, what did the effect do to it? And that's called the wet side. The nice thing about the digital workstations is you can actually say, well, that wet side did something that I didn't want it to do, or it did too much of something. So I need to bring some of my original signal back. And so what we're doing here is, it sounds a little weird to have that complete, absolute silence in between the words. We expect to hear a little tiny bit of breath. We expect to hear a little tiny bit of room tone. So we use that dry side to bring just a hint of that breath back without it being distracting. So there's the dry side slider, and I usually bring it back to maybe minus 40 dB, maybe minus 60 dB. And that's just to bring a little tiny bit of that room sound back without it being distracting. So now let's see if that day gets any better. Fill in for the day. Fill in for the day. Two privates. Still hear it a little bit. Let's see. Fill in for the day. Two privates and a lieutenant made up the... And maybe we need to have the release go a little tiny bit longer. Fill in for the day. Two privates and a lieutenant made up the crew of Engine 3. And when one of the privates was out sick, the other one would automatically become the driver for the day. The air was filled with the fragrance of summer that morning as we waited for... The air was filled with the fragrance of summer that morning as we waited for our guest to arrive. It would be a beautiful day for Sydney. Now those sound much better. So we've managed all that breath in the middle, and we've now got it set so that you can still hear that little tiny hint of room tone. You can still hear me working. You can still hear me breathing, but it's not so distracting that you hear the breaths in between words, which over time, people will latch onto it as they're listening. They'll latch onto it, and they'll end up just hearing your breaths in between and get distracted instead of what you're actually talking about. Sometimes it's okay, but if you have a distinctive breath noise that happens every time you create a sentence, then people will start to latch onto it, and that's all they'll ever hear. And so you want to try and minimize it as much as you can. And so a gate. That really helps. Once you get the hang of the settings, you can tell Reaper or your digital audio workstation to memorize those settings as a preset, because your delivery generally is your delivery, and you'll do it the same similarly every time. So you can also have it save those parameters, save those settings. In Reaper, we just do it as a preset here, and we can make our own. We use the plus sign, we save it, and we call it Mike's default gate, something like that. And that way I can have it come back and always remember those settings as my preferred settings for my gate. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Now, get in your booth and record something amazing.